Right. So,
Yes.
now,
Well, that was a mouthful. I gotta tell you, I'm the business about Maria Riker possibly being the long sought after but missing Elizabeth Adler
yeah, well,
is to me
yep.
extreme. And now this, I know I've seen pictures of this place in Norway, and in fact, I think I've seen it on a Russian site that
Well, it
a
doesn't
bunch of
help that it's in Russia. How do I get there?
well, the Russians are looking at this and wondering, what the heck was going on here too, So
That's what troubles me is what all those interesting places that was overrun by the Russians that we still can't get any information of.
well, look, the one of the things I think for the next round with Igor that we have to remember to ask him is what has his research or what may he have run into that he didn't really put into any of his books was the Soviet take on all of this. The whole Bell story
Yes.
with the affidavit of that SS general whose surname I can't remember right off the top of my head, Sporenberg, Jakob
Poor
Sporenberg.
guy. Yeah.
That he gave to the Polish War Crimes Court. Well, the Russians have to know about that.
Yes. Not
They
to
had
mention
to.
why is it not in the Polish archives if it was part of
Exactly.
a war crime trial?
Right. So, there had to have been some sort of Soviet response or investigation of all of this. And personally, my guess has always been that this came in the form of all that Stalin era, Khrushchev era
Yeah.
research into torsion physics, Kozyrev and people like that. Pardon me. So I think there's a Soviet component to this story that we know little about because, of course, the Russians are going to keep that under iron tight classification. But
Well, the Russians had an Elsos team equivalent as
oh,
well. If
sure,
you
of course they did. Of course they
Farrell
did.
and a few others, and some of their findings have been released.
Right.
Some of what they found the nuclear reactor. What's left? It was interesting when they came to Berlin, and I'm not entirely sure how the Americans had gotten to that particular building first in Berlin. That's in their report that they
Mhm.
came to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute,
Oh
which
yeah.
had not
Uh-huh.
been bombed, it had
Right.
not been ransacked, but everything had been thrown out because some of the people who worked there had knew some of the Russian scientists that was on the Russian Alsos mission, so they had reached out to them and said, "You got to come here." But when they got to the reactor site, everything had been cleaned out and was thrown out back in a big pile. And the Americans were there and said, "Why do you want to go? There's nothing here except the swimming pool in the basement." Because apparently that was just a GI who had no idea. So they up the swimming pool in the background. Like, no, not in my.
No.
And that's where they then went to the Ardennes in a laboratory and confiscated all his stuff and
Fun.
cyclotrons and all
You
his
mean
things.
Fun Ardena?
Yes,
Okay.
and
All right.
so they got him there and made him an offer to come work,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
with a lot of others, like was it Dr. Witt, who also who oversaw the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute at the time, I think was his name. He didn't have much of it. They didn't feel they had much of a choice but to go work for the Russians.
Right.
And in return, those scientists went to work for the Russians, and their families would be kept safe, which at the time were Russian soldiers were rampaging through Berlin, raping everything. So I understand the pressure.
Sure. Of
And of
course.
course, Ardennes, who also had worked with the Postal Service, which is interesting because last time I talked to George Rybienski out at Jonastal, there's two things he I don't know if I mentioned that to you. The last time I sort of forgot to mention. I don't know if he forgot to mention it, but when they had the nuclear test in Jonastal, there was people from two units observed there, officers
Uh
from
huh.
the Postal Service
Uh
and
huh.
from the Annenebe.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I thought. And a whole
Well,
lot
look,
more.
I have no doubt, given what Igor outlined today, particularly about Maria Reicher, a mathematician, you know, scratching around in Latin America around runes and Nazca lines, so on and so forth. That reeks of Ananarba. And it's this is the kind of overlap sort of wacky research that the Ananarba would specialize in. So it doesn't surprise me now that there may have been an Ananarba component of their nuclear research too. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And if that's the case, it explains why so much of the Ananarba material that's in the possession of the American archives is still classified.
Yes, it is.
Um, it explains a great deal.
I have a
Um,
letter from Kamala. I have a correspondence between Kamala and Himmler that refers back to a meeting at the Ananaba where Kamala was still looking for decentralized, safe locations in relation to Ananaba installations and
uh-huh.
also decentralization of everything else they were doing.
Well,
He was involved, and I don't see Kamala if they were just looking at ruins and old pottery. I don't see him as being
no,
particularly
no, no. Any mention of Kamler in connection with the Ananarba, that gives the game away right there. That
right.
there's a whole lot more going on than Himmler sponsoring archaeology projects.
I'm
In
sure.
fact, it gives a certain new twist on his attempts to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies, because he still thinks he's got something that they'd be interested in,
And
and
he
as
probably did.
well, he probably did,
I
but as
definitely did.
Nick Cook pointed out in his book, Kammler had gained such control over the whole secret apparatus by that point. Himmler's negotiating, with an empty hand. It's Kammler who has all the cards. So,
But did the British know that when they killed
well, the
him?
British may not have known it. I
No,
don't
that's what
I don't
they
think they
made that up
would.
for other reasons,
Yeah, they may have. Yeah, exactly.
royal reasons.
Yeah, well, who's to say that Kammler didn't have a spy inside the British team and he bumped Himmler off? Who knows?
Count Tillman told me that Himmler had tried to have him assassinated on 3 different occasions.
Kammler?
Yeah,
I can believe it.
the Kamala family told me that Himmler had tried to have him killed, and there must have been an interesting war going on. Also,
Oh
that
yeah.
him between the fractions at that point, and the only thing
Well,
they had,
look, if Himmler tried to have Kammler assassinated, then that puts Kammler's association with Gestapo Miller into a whole new light, because Miller was the one responsible for Kammler's security
yeah,
around the whole Kammler stop. So, in other words, you've got Himmler versus Miller and Kammler, and prior to Miller taking over that little bit of counterintelligence for the Kammler stop there in Pilsen, who's in charge of that?
exactly.
Heydrich.
Heydrich,
Heydrich.
exactly. And there's plenty of connection between Bormann and Kamala as
Oh yeah.
well.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And
It's like I put it in Secrets of the Unified Field. That's the unholy trinity:
exactly,
Bormann, Kammler, and Miller. You
exactly.
know, there's your Nazi international right there.
And
Um,
and Bormann would try to get rid of Himmler like he was trying to get rid of everybody who was a threat to his
yes.
uh, there's almost no way those two could both have come out of the war alive,
No.
given that they were practically fighting to protect the same assets.
Well, we've
Um,
got to, the next time we have Igor in, we've got to remember to ask him, has he run into anything about the survival of Bormann and Miller after the war?
well, it's
Um,
interesting you should mention it because I have a very interesting, renowned Argentinian historian who invited me to come out to Argentina and travel down South America, where he will take me to the very site of the mausoleum where Hitler's buried and
Listen,
Falkenlein is buried. and
Oh
the
my.
remains of 4 men's body, missing a head and a shoulder, because that was what they found in Berlin. Fagel, again, like you have talked about yourself, a lot of the people that was offed,
Oft, yeah.
like Fegelein, he's the one that carried the bonds, because it's about bonds
Yeah.
and money that Hitler owned out of the country.
Look, look, Tino, I don't even think that Admiral Canaris was really oft.
Like, I was going to say that. No one
Well,
saw him.
look, in World War One, Admiral von Spee kind of gives Canaris carte blanche to go looking for coves and bases for potential U-boat bases in World War One. So, of all the people in the Nazi hierarchy that know how and where to smuggle stuff into Latin America, it's Admiral Canaris.
And what did he say he found?
Lots.
But
Well, look. I think the problem is we're going to have to take a second look at the whole story behind the post bomb plot executions. Some of those people are genuine. Goodler and people like that, Beck, General Beck. But Canaris always struck me as an odd thing. Yeah, he may have been he may have been shifty and conniving and duplicitous, all of the above, which he certainly
it's
was.
intelligence.
Yeah, but yeah, he's the head of military counterintelligence. So yeah, he's
Yeah,
going to be shifty and
it's
conniving.
supposed to be.
He's supposed to be shifty and conniving. So I always had my suspicions that no, they're not going to kill someone like that, especially if you've got Bormann in charge of trying to get all of this stuff out of Europe and continue the cause. You need Canaris.
And
You
Canaris,
need
he said that he found the Shangri-La for the Fuhrer. Wasn't that what he wrote?
well, that was Dönitz.
Oh, they're doing this. I'm sorry. How
That was
could I
Dönitz.
possibly confuse those
No,
two?
Dönitz. That's another. There are versions of that quotation. And the different versions, this is another little historiographical problem that people are going to have to start investigating far more seriously than they have. There's the Antarctic version of that quotation. There is another version that is, I think, much more authentic. That does not indicate that it's necessarily Antarctica that Grand Admiral Dönitz is referring to. But yeah, I think. And the other problem is that quotation in some of the versions that you encounter occurs in the context of remarks that he made to his fellow inmates at Nuremberg. So the
Yeah.
question is, all right, if you're dealing with Grand Admiral Dönitz and the people that he's with at Nuremberg, well, you're talking about Admiral Raeder, you're talking about Rudolf Hess, Hermann Goering, Field Marshal Keitel. You're not dealing with lower ranking people here. So the question is, where is this story coming from? Who among that group of people would have repeated it? You know who I'm guessing? Albert Speer.
I believe that. Uh, and where are the recordings of all those prisoners? Because they were
Bingo.
all recorded. Where are
Yes,
they?
bingo.
They're honest talk. Like even the table talk initially, when that was published, that was edited. The
Uh-huh.
Farm Hall transcripts, the original publication of that was edited as well.
Oh yeah.
And just like you're talking about, that so much of what we've been told of then have been edited, altered, changed, disappeared, which makes pretty much everyone who supposedly won the war look guilty of something.
Well, yeah, I absolutely think so. Just the fact of what you mentioned earlier was something I did not know about the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute not having been bombed.
Yeah,
So wait a minute here. How do you get an agreement among the British, the Americans, and the Russians not to bomb the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute?
today the building still stands, and the laboratory is a library. Where, okay.
Oh well,
And the Russians, they wrote that they found in the scrap pile, they found discarded equipment, they found books, they found notes, they found, that's how they found that Dr. Witt was a clever man. and they put
Yeah.
together it was an incredibly well built building, and well with all the machinery and technology of the day, which means that there was high tech involved in the research
Sure.
in Berlin, which would have most certainly been duplicated somewhere else,
Oh
because
yeah.
it's almost like, I mean, the way they bombed Berlin, it's almost more luck than draw that it wasn't at least bombed, but not shelled or shot up by tanks. That's different.
Exactly. That's another
Somebody must
thing to
have been on the
consider.
ground keeping
Yes.
the Russians from aiming at it.
Yeah.
If it survived the Eighth Air Force, that's that's good enough. But they must have copied all this somewhere else, and that's one of the
Yeah.
things I wanted to ask Igor is when I'm crawling around these places, that all these decentralized research locations, what am I looking for? What would this have looked like? What infrastructure would be needed for a Bell test?
Well, um, to a certain extent, he provided some of the answers to that in the truth about the Wunderwaffe, the henge, and so on. Which I've never ever bought the story that this was the foundation for a cooling tower.
No.
Um, no, they're similarities, but they're all similarity stuff. But the other thing I think this business about Linga Hamari or whatever it's called
Mm.
in Norway, this I have seen. And if his intuition is correct, and I think it is, that it's got something to do with the Bell Project. And incidentally, I caught very definitely what he said that confirms your take on these installations, that the Bell Project was something part of much larger
Yeah.
project. It was a component of it, and that
Yeah. You're not
that
going to get
really clicked. Yeah. Um, so the other thing that we need to remember to ask him next time is, well, what's that much larger thing that it was a part of? I think a huge clue is provided by Tom Augustin and his book, and then
blunder.
who gets lost in the shuffle here. Tom Augustin was the guy that first brought the world's attention to the Kammler stop back in the 1980s.
Blunder.
Yeah, blunder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you almost can't cry when you read how piss poorly that American captain handled that.
Oh, it. Well, look, but the thing that Augustine mentioned was that the Kammerstoff was working on areas of physics that were so horrifying that well, what's horrifying about? Well, what could be more horrifying than nuclear weapons, or even for that matter, at the time, thermonuclear weapons? What's more horrifying than that? And then you kind of file that away, and you take Igor's research that this was all about gravity and anti-gravity, and then you go down to Argentina and listen to Dr. Richter and what he's saying
Yeah.
about plasmas being a method of tapping into the 0 point energy. Weaponize that stuff, folks, and you've got something that makes a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker. um, you've got you, you've got the doomsday weapon if you
Yeah.
weaponize that stuff.
Weaponization is one thing. Himmler was very well aware, even from the beginning of the war, just like the Russians were of Germany, that they did not have enough natural energy, not enough oil, not
Right,
enough coal, yes,
right.
but which is wonder why that all the coal down in the Silesia around the Project Lisa was stopped being mined, because it was far better coal than that of the Ruhr, which means they actually that mine was laid dormant, although it had some of the best coal in the middle of the war when they needed coal.
Cool. Right,
So maybe they're doing something else in that particular mine that would make it impossible to mine. But
right.
again, they were looking. I'm like my thorium thesis. Like you see, Solvay today, they're doing thorium reactors now, and a salt
Tino,
based.
come on. We know it's for toothpaste.
Oh, this kind of love. Oh, you saw my episode of that? Oh, it's like you don't think Kamala was getting into the makeup business?
No. Bright, shiny teeth with thoropaste. But no. Yeah,
You can read by it at night too. Just keep smiling.
yeah.
Um,
There you go. Read your book. No, I take your point. They needed energy, and this was this was a major component of the research. But um, I mean, come on, folks. These are Germans. They're going to realize very early on that if this is the kind of stuff they're researching for their energy, it will pay big dividends in terms of their military and weapons technology as well.
Oh yes.
So, they're going to pour everything into it that they can.
Yeah.
And that's their Manhattan Project. So, while we're tinkering around, fiddling around with mere atom bombs, they're going after the grand prize right out the gate. And
I mean, the French archives did say that the Germans were 6 months away from mass producing nuclear weapons.
yeah, I believe it.
That was in the French intelligence that came out
Yeah,
with that.
yeah.
So uh, again, we're looking at what haven't been found underground because I still think a lot of it has been obfuscated and destroyed
Oh,
that they
totally.
couldn't get out, which leads back to why no one's allowed to look for it.
Now, here's I have to go on record immediately here, folks. I have to do this because this is another one of my wild take a dive off the end of the twig into the canyon below. Wild E. Coyote, Joseph P. Farrell, high octane speculations. When Igor mentioned this place in Norway, Lingahamari, um, in connection to the bell, and what's the bell connected to? Well, plasma, anti gravity. And he mentioned, well, we're putting it here because it's the closest place in continental Europe to the United States. Makes perfect sense.
Curvature of the
But
Earth. Yeah.
something else makes perfect sense in terms of whatever it was the Germans may have been up to, especially in terms of Bell and weaponization, and that's plasma. Now, what happens at those latitudes, folks? That's a plasma phenomenon.
It's colder.
Aurora borealis. So think something kind of like HARP related, ionospheric heaters. Couple all this technology together and start taking pot shots at the United States. Uh, when he said that, I quite literally the hairs on the back of my neck kind of went like that. Because plasmas, fusion, Bell, anti gravity, aurora borealis. In other words, that may have been an attempt to weaponize the planet.
Yeah.
Um, and would they do it? Of course they would.
Of course they would. Yeah, of course they would.
They're Nazis. So that's easily answered. So,
Yes.
So yeah, I there's something about this place that we're going to have to investigate very, very carefully.
Which is a problem since it's on the Russian side today.
Yeah, but if we make nice with the Russians, maybe they'll let us go look at it.
I'll ask nicely. But
Yeah, put in your order with Mr. Trump. Can you get us over there?
I'll make some calls right away.
Yeah, make some calls, Tino. Have your people get in touch with
Uh,
my people and Trump's people. We'll try and get this set up.
But it's interesting because I remember seeing a document where the Himmler had released over some 15,000 scientists from military service for the nuclear program, and
Interesting.
they were all sent out to the military, and then they were all called back to their scientific research. And at no point in time is there one singular German program with 15,000 people,
No,
scientists working on it that we know of.
know of. Right.
Which brought me always makes it interesting. Like, well, where did they go then? And you can't say that the nuclear program was canceled by Hitler in '42 because we were winning the war, and but no, because they still kept going, and Ardennes had his thing, and where did Rolf Engel go?
Well, look, I have never bought this business that there is not. I do think the German program was, because of the exigencies of the war, it was highly decentralized. In other words, it's not a Manhattan project.
No,
with, these massive installations in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and so on. They couldn't do it that way. But that just because the program is decentralized does not mean it lacks a coordinating body.
Correct.
That, I mean, come on, folks, we're dealing with Nazis here. so the idea that there's not going to be somebody in control of this whole thing and coordinating it makes no sense. This is not and again, I think that coordinating arm is precisely Kamler and the Kamler stuff.
Coordinating
he set it up that way.
Yeah, and that corresponds with the papers he's written between him. Decentralization.
Yeah, exactly. So this was never an operation that could be easily penetrated. You might penetrate a part of it, but you'd have to get all the way into the core of the Kamler stop itself. And Miller is in charge of the counterintelligence on that, and he's got that shut down 6 ways from Sunday. We don't even know about it really until after the war is over. And even then, we don't even really find out about it until long after the war is over with Augustine's book Blunder. That's in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So, this thing is much larger. I think, given what Igor says, we're looking at a nuclear program that is also at the same time an energy program to keep Germany energy sufficient. And we're looking at the ultimate weapons program, and we're looking at a secret space program all at once.
Yeah.
Because that's the implications of the physics involved in what they're doing.
Well, you're not the only one who can come up with crazy high-octane speculations. Here's one.
Oh, be my guest. Permit me to shove you off the cliff,
Let me try to see if I can come up with an idea. So we make all of these interesting projects during the war. We hide them in the meantime, and we perfect them. We perfect 0-point gravity. Now we have energy out of nothing.
Yeah.
Then we, of course, parallel with the EU rising, the UN rising, the globalist rising, we take over these bodies. We destroy Western energy production, gas, oil, in the name of climate change. And then we introduce our new, well, not new because they've been existing for a long time, 0-point gravity.
Yeah, sure, of course.
I mean, if you destroy all fuel and coal and everything, you have to replace it with something. We all think these globalists are insane. We all think these green people are insane. But maybe they're pushed by an entity that's not as insane.
Yeah.
But it's just waiting for the right time to present their old Nazi tech.
They're waiting for the right time, but remember what I've been saying for a long time, and this should give everybody chills. Let's call this Tesla technology, his wireless power transmission. This has been around for a while. The problem has always been that if you have any sort of basic electrical engineering knowledge, you can engineer this stuff.
Yep.
You, me, in our garage. So in other words, Mr. Globaloney has been presented with a technological problem of the ultimate weapon falling into the hands of garage tinkerers. In other words, they've got a whopper of a proliferation problem.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they roll this stuff out and prevent it from blowing the planet up from some crazy? Well, they have to be able to track and monitor everyone in real time. So it's not without reason that we're seeing what I call, and Catherine Fitz calls, all these beast systems being rolled out at precisely the time that this technology, we hear little glimpses of it every now and then. Lockheed Martin and their fusion reactor that can fit on the back of a truck. Okay, fine. But, a fusion reactor, if that plasma containment goes down, what are you really saying? Well, I've got my little hydrogen bomb on the back of my truck and it's going to melt down. So we better evacuate pretty soon. Get out of the county while you can. So, this is the problem that they've had. And
Yeah.
they're this close to being able to implement it. The problem is, in trying to implement it, they're implementing a beast system, and there are a few of us around that aren't going to take their mark. That's
More
their
and more.
problem. That's
Yeah.
their problem, and it's a huge one. So, here's the other thing that just grabbed me and about what Igor said, and I want to talk to you about this after the recording is over,
Sure.
because well, you remember Igor said that he had been to Argentina and you had been invited to Argentina,
Mhm.
and these people are showing him around and telling him certain things. I don't doubt that for a minute, and I want to talk to you off the recording because there are certain things I came this close to asking Igor while he was here, but I thought no, that may be something he would prefer not to have people know.
I mean, he has been. I remember he and I talked about it because we first time I met him years ago was right after somebody had told me to back off. I
Uh huh.
remember I told you about that
Uh
up
huh.
in the Lisa Mountains in a crowd in one of the tunnels. That no, Herr Struckmann, these are not things people want to know. And he had had a similar experience on some things, being told to lay off.
Yeah.
So obviously there's some interest in certain things. Uh,
Yes.
and of what you just said, I feel I should tell you a secret, and I think I can because I'm not smart enough to know exactly what it is. But I do have a friend of mine. He is a very, very smart person who does things. He have had his warehouse running on a hydrogen, basically 2 buckets of water for the past month.
Oh, I can believe it.
Uh, but he is specifically being very careful with how to present it and roll it out because
Oh
he
yeah.
wants everybody to get it at the same time while
Right.
he holds the patent as long as he can. Because just like you said, it will be copied immediately.
Right.
And when you see the Internet Archive, there's a lot more going on to this, but they are hiding a lot of things, and
Oh,
they're doing
huge.
everything they can to suppress information, starting with history and the history of. Speaking of what Igor said, some about Heisenberg, because I was always under the impression that Heisenberg was always on the outside looking in. I did not know he was also dabbling stuff in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. That one was a new one to me too, and that's
Oh,
the reason why I asked him about Burkhard Heim.
and that maybe would you care to share a little bit more about him as well?
Burkhard Heim, Igor is correct. Burkhard Heim was a young physicist that when you investigate him, you discover that he was a member of some team that was headed by Werner Heisenberg. And that's what Igor missed when I asked
Mhm.
him about it. But you can discover that Heim was working for something. He had been introduced to Heisenberg, and Heisenberg took him on because Heim was a very he was one of these young nerds that was a brilliant physics mathematics mind. So Heisenberg took him into his team. The assumption has always been in the literature that Burkhard Heim was a member of Heisenberg's outside team, the team that went on to build that contraption at
Yeah,
Heigerloch and all that stuff. But to find, when Igor said that there was something that Heisenberg was involved with inside of modern day Bohemia,
hmm
that puts a different spin on it altogether. So now we have Heisenberg involved in potentially a very real research project while maintaining a posture of nonsense for the
yeah.
Americans and British to find. And again, that would be very, very like them to do.
And he said he was
Heim,
fine.
yeah,
Go
well, Heim was, if you read about Heim, he was blind and he had lost both of his hands. All he had for hands were stubs because he had suffered some sort of accident during the war that he lost his sight and he lost his hands. but it was the story of Burkhard Heim is truly amazing because Heim, and you can't even find English versions of his theory, Tino. This is how weird the story is. Burkhard Heim taught his wife how to read and notate mathematics because he needed someone to take the transcriptions of his thinking for his theory and be able to notate it mathematically. So Heim developed a whole system of mathematics that no one has seen called selector calculus, which to me, anything having to do with mathematical languages that no one's heard of perks my interest immediately. Leibniz's Characteristica Universalis and all of that. So Heim supposedly developed a selector calculus, a type of mathematics to deal with his theory, which is an extension of quantum mechanics. And the problem with his theory is that on the basis of his theory, he was able, supposedly, to predict some fundamental particle physics long ahead of the experimental confirmation of the theory. The theory also predicts certain gravitational and anti-gravitational effects that fall out from the theory. So in other words, again, we have a quantum physicist that is somehow after the war developing a theory that has a lot to do with quantum mechanics and anti-gravity, and he's blind. So he's like Hawking. He's thinking of all of this in his head.
Yeah.
The problem is he only published his theory at, and this is going to blow your mind, from an occult publisher in Vienna.
Really?
So once again, here we have that post-war Viennese weird Nazi stuff, and this guy, a serious physicist and mathematician, is publishing his entire theory from an obscure occult publisher in Vienna, Austria. I have never been able to get a copy, and no one that I know has been able to get a copy of Heim theory in either German or English. If you can, please let me know because I want to look at it. You can go online and look up Heim theory.
I need you to help me find a book written by Bernhard Heim.
Burkhard
Heim, published in Vienna. When?
Yeah, Vienna.
When was it?
That I don't know. Probably the 50s or 60s.
Probably in the 50s on
Or
his
60s.
physics theory.
Yeah. Now I've written about Burkhard Heim in the Philosopher's Stone. In fact, you can find a picture of him in the Philosopher's Stone. But he is one of these. Pardon me?
He has so far never let me down. We'll see.
Who's he?
Tom. You'll see me with him every now and again. I always call him the Destroyer. He was a former Gebirgsjäger, and he spends way too much time researching.
Okay.
Despite that, he has the I'm gonna make fun of him. The shape of crawling up mountains of an asthmatic billy goat. However, he has been.
Well, yeah, he's a Gebirgsjäger, so that would make some sense.
Smoking, Tom. I told you about the smoking, didn't I? But he has found pretty much everything I have ever asked for. So if anybody can find it, it's him. We believe in you. It's all on you now.
Well, if he finds it and it's relatively inexpensive, I don't care if it is in German. I'll polish off my rusty German because I want to find out about. People have written about Heim theory. They have talked about it at the American International Engineers conferences and in reference to anti-gravity, but no one has actually reproduced Heim himself. They talk about him and around him, but no one has ever produced primary source material. This is my problem, being the kind of quackademic that I am.
In archives?
Well, again, this is the problem. He only, as far as I'm aware, he's only published in German. He refused to publish his theory in English. and he refused to publish it in any scientific journal. So, the guy was a bit of a strange, he's like Pascual Jordan, another very, that Igor mentioned, Ott Christian Hilgenberg, another one of these brilliant, wartime German physicists that no one has heard of in the West. Hilgenberg, I talked about Hilgenberg in Reich of the Black Sun. And again, this guy, he completely re-engineered the periodic table of the elements and was able to do so in such a way to predict the weights and half-lives of the transuranic elements. Things that hadn't even been discovered in his day and are just now being synthesized in particle accelerators. So, you're dealing with some very, very different kinds of physicists thinking in these quantum mechanical terms, and they've developed all these theories. And again, the interesting thing, Tino, is these theories, as far as I can tell, do not end up becoming part of the standard model of quantum mechanics. That's the other very intriguing thing about it. Standard theory, you're dealing with Murray-Gell-Mann and quarks and all of this stuff. None of these other theories that I've encountered are going in that direction. And again, it's all these Germans from the war that are doing it,
who are not wanting them to be translated, because the only way scientists really are communicating is in their own journals across
right?
borders at this
Exactly. Exactly. And as well as I do, reading scientific German is, it's
point. Yeah.
it's like reading Hegel on steroids. It's you know, these sentences are constructed like Chinese puzzle boxes. They must be opened very carefully and deliberately in a very particular order.
I think that's
And then
really
at the end of the monument, to quote Mark Twain, we get something like "Gewählten, gewährten, gehabt, geworden sein," or and the monument is finished. Twain says.
maybe they should be read while on LSD.
Well, I don't know, but Heim is one of these people that like that Dr. Elizabeth Adler, that is part of this story that has fascinated me
Yes.
immensely. And no one has been able to go out and flesh out what are these people doing. We knew Igor in his Truth About the Wunderwaffe pointed out that Elizabeth Adler was supposedly a specialist in mathematics of spheres.
Yeah.
And in the context of everything else I was trying to reverse engineer, I thought, okay, rotating spheres, Pascual Jordan and his theory of the Earth having an expanding mass, that the mass of the planet is not a constant. That's throw that one into general relativity and see what you get.
Don't throw it into general media, because then there'll really be a panic attack.
Well,
She
this
was
is
supposed to be Polish too, wasn't she?
yeah.
She
Well,
went to the Warsaw.
University of Königsberg was where she supposedly was. Well, I'm thinking, okay, Königsberg, who else is there that deals in weird mathematics? Theodor Kaluza,
Yeah.
the mathematician. And what did Kaluza do? He came out with the first hyperdimensional unified field theory, unifying electromagnetism and gravity. That's what he did in 5 dimensions. So, if you're
Changing
dealing,
names makes perfect sense.
oh, absolutely,
Especially for the Germans to change their names during the war, so
absolutely.
their research and on papers, and afterwards, if we brought them, well, we don't even know what happened to half of them or afterwards, do we?
That's the problem.
Did they
That's
get a third name? I mean, because most of the scientists, some of them went back to what they did before, like Deepna and so on, but a lot of them just disappeared. We don't know who half the scientists on the Kammerstop was.
well. This is the problem. There is such a gaping hole with respect to the German research. Most people forget that in 1949, 4 years after the end of the war, Krupp has secretly built an atomic reactor in this little German town that's right across the border from the Netherlands, and it's functioning. So people are asking, well, how did Germany, West Germany, managed to close the nuclear fuel cycle so quickly. Germany is, like it or not, folks, Germany right now is a turnkey nuclear power. All they need to do is produce all the stuff for a bomb and just assemble it. That's all they need to do.
Yes.
And they don't even need to test it. I mean, they're like the Japanese.
Yeah.
So, how did that happen? Well, it's not happening in a vacuum, people. You're not dealing with dunces. You're dealing with the country that invented nuclear physics, for crying out loud. So come on.
And that's what was always so crazy to me, that they just wrote everything off. At the moment they rode into Strasbourg, they had nothing. Don't worry about it. In 44 already. That perception have never changed.
No.
When you look at
it never made sense to me as a kid, and it still doesn't make sense to me.
No. And what's really funny is, if there really was nothing, when I found 4 of the Alsace team's original films that they filmed as they were driving through from Paris all the way through to Heikelok and to Stadilum. I sent them to you, didn't I?
I think you sent a couple to me.
They're there, and they're like, well, we're interrogating a German. We have no idea who he is, what they're talking about. This is a quick they're in Stadilum. They're filming outside the building for a second. They never go inside. They're doing Mittelbau. They never go inside. They're in Heikelok. We don't go inside. And then I thought to myself, when I was looking at these Heikelok pictures, here's this black and white of the cubes hanging. I'm like, no, wait a minute. They pulled all the cubes out and hid them in a field. So what are these things hanging? That can't be an original photo from what they found.
No, of course not.
So everything is made up about this.
Everything, yes. Do we even know that they were just all these cubes on chains? I mean, come on.
I know.
That has always been the thing that has bothered me the most about this post-war Allied legend, is that Heigerloch with these cubes.
No.
That coming from Heisenberg?
Yeah.
No.
I like to think that even he knew better.
Oh, come on. None of it ever made sense. For one thing, Heisenberg was enough of a physicist to know that putting little uranium cubes on chains is going to contaminate the sample. And
I mean, they already lost one reactor that blew up. They should have learned something from that.
Yeah, and why did the reactor blow up? If they're not able to produce an explosion, then why do we have a reactor? I mean, come on. None of it makes sense. And
yeah, because the one I got almost certainly exploded, because you have little pieces of radioactive uranium stuff lying all over the place. I was there. It's very interesting.
And where did they get it?
Yeah. They never had a shortage of it.
We had enough enriched uranium to blow up?
Yeah. They had so much uranium that they had 100 tons sitting in a warehouse in Belgium or Holland.
Tino, the amount of missing uranium from Nazi Germany is in excess of 600 tons.
Yes.
Tons. Not ounces, not pounds, tons. Yeah, that's a lot of folks, that's an awful lot of uranium to be enriching. That's so much uranium to be enriching. Nothing even remotely approaching that amount happens in the Manhattan Project.
No.
So whatever's going on.
You can make a lot of toothpaste out of that.
Yeah. Yes, Dolph, your teeth need to be whitened. Here, use this.
Glow in the dark golf balls.
Yeah. For all you Nazi golf players out there.
And if you hit it too hard, you'll definitely make it.
You'll definitely, yes. There will definitely be a reaction.
I think what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with that? No, none of this story makes sense, and to Igor's credit, he I think deserves as much credit as Tom Agostin and
yes.
his book Blunder for bringing the patent absurdity of this whole narrative. There, if you study just the military operations of World War II in the European theater, if you just study the military operations alone, particularly from, let's say, June of 1944 on, Bagration, the D-Day landings, all of that, you get the impression that both sides are in this race against time, this desperate, desperate race against time. Um, the Wehrmacht is trying for dear life to hold on, and the Allies are trying for dear life to get rid of the dang thing. Um, and at the
Meanwhile,
heart of
you can plot patterns. You can pretty much plot all the Kamla special places, and then you can follow kind of pattern going
yeah, you
forward.
can follow the Third Army, and oh wow, isn't that interesting? Ding, ding, ding! It just happens to be going to all those places.
I mean,
Um,
Patton wrote in his diary that glory would be to the one who took Ohrdruf, because it would be the most glorious victory of ever. Ohrdruf was a Truppenübungsplatz. What
yeah, it
what
was a
glory
little
is that?
town. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like nothing there.
Well,
So
that's that in my opinion is why Patton was killed. He knew too much.
absolutely
He's
did.
clearly getting the field intelligence reports from his units as they're going in.
Absolutely.
So he's got an on the ground, up to date, 24-hour, up to date picture of what his units are encountering. So if anyone on the Allied side of things had a picture of what the Nazis were up
Yeah.
to, it was George Patton.
There's aerial reconnaissance of the
Absolutely.
nuclear device they tested in March, just a month before Patton got there to Woodruff, and he was a few miles from it. You don't think he may have visited? You don't think there might have been
Oh
people with
no,
Geiger counters running around there?
no, no. He was being very carefully steered by
Yeah,
somebody, and the real problem is who was steering him. Was it Allied intelligence, or was this somehow coming from inside the Third Reich and being shunted to him? And that's my guess.
because there must have been a loose coordination between,
Yeah,
and I keep pointing back to Dulles because he just seems like the obvious choice, since Schellenberg was in contact with Dulles. There was SS.
Schellenberg was in contact with Dulles. So was SS General Wolf.
Yeah,
And the real problem here is that Dulles is also trying to arrange his own separate peace with the
yeah, yeah,
Nazis, and that's something that people forget. So
yeah,
there
yeah.
is an intelligence game going on,
And
and
he
I
was
don't.
shut down by Washington in doing so.
He was shot down by Washington in doing so. I don't think anybody at SHAEF, British or American or French, had any real understanding or clue as to what was going on, other than perhaps General Patton. And that raises all sorts of questions about, well, who got rid of him then?
Yeah.
Um, Again, given what I wrote about that post-war incursion into Czechoslovakia in Secrets of the Unified Field, my guess is that operation was probably a disguised operation, that it may have been some group like Spina or Odessa or somebody like that,
Yeah.
donning American uniforms and going in and cleaning out the cache, because the American response to that incident is really nobody knows what's going on.
They did it in Stesovice, so why not?
Right,
Where
exactly.
they got
So
caught. So
yeah, and if that happens, then I have no doubt that the other loose end that they need to tie up would be George Patton. And again, the two things happen in more or less the same relative time frame.
did we
So
ever find a connection between Patton and Dulles?
no.
I wonder if they were in contact. Or maybe we should.
However, in a certain sense, there is a connection. You've got to remember that Patton's family was independently well-to-do.
Yeah.
He was Episcopalian, and in American circles, that's the church where the elite go, and so you have that kind of class cultural connection to the same sort of circles that the Dulles brothers moved in. So there's a chance that you just pick things up in the wind about what Patton has discovered that way. And particularly so if Patton is encountering units of the SS as he's going into all of these areas. Yeah, there's so much mystery about the end of the war that
And
the whole thing.
yeah,
Go ahead.
the interesting meetings in forests here and
Yes.
there, with no one
Yeah.
shooting at each other, and a lot of those.
Yeah, a lot of those, a whole lot of those,
So,
and
yeah,
and the strangeness of all of those deaths, so-called deaths at the end of the war of these people. Um, there's much more going on than meets the eye.
did you ever talk to or meet Patton's granddaughter?
No.
She
Now
had
I
any?
have met Eisenhower's granddaughter.
Did she have any?
I have met Laura Eisenhower. I mean, she. If you've ever met, I I don't have kind words.
Okay.
Um, she is loopier than a bowl of Fruit Loops.
Mm, okay.
Uh,
Um,
she looks like Ike. I mean, literally looks like Ike with a bad hairdo.
ooh, charming.
Um, yeah, I have briefly met her. Um, the interesting thing about her is that she has all sorts of stories that she tells about her grandfather. That at the time I first heard them, I thought, "Wow." But the more you get into this high strangeness, maybe her grandfather told her some things that he didn't put into the public record.
Really?
Who knows?
Did she ever write anything? She's still around, isn't she?
Oh yeah, she's still around. I met her at a conference that Bosley and I had been invited to speak at out in your home state of lunacy,
Hmm.
and I forgive me, I don't mind at all. Barging in on California at every opportunity that I can. But um, we were both at this conference that George Norrie was supposed to speak at or moderate or something, and she showed up to this conference, and she actually came over to our book booth. She picked up a couple of my books, like I had my Nazi International book and so on display, and she just thought, oh, this is nonsense, blah blah blah. My grandfather said this, my grandfather said that. And Walter and I are just kind of listening. I'm still stunned that I'm looking at Ike with a bad hairdo. I
Yeah, that's
can't
gonna be
find.
chocolate
I
anyway.
can't. Well, it was just weird. you know you know I expected him to be holding a golf club, at the minimum. But anyway, it was just weird. So I was kind of speechless. Like, I'm looking at Dwight Eisenhower's granddaughter right now, and she looks exactly like him. But anyway,
I mean, Patton's granddaughter has some interesting ideas.
oh, I'm sure she does.
Um, I think she takes after him in quite a few ways. Um,
Kill them all.
I don't. That didn't come up in conversation, but no, not that way. Might be a little eccentric,
Well, yeah, he certainly was
and she might be
a
not
little eccentric.
eccentric.
Okay,
Um, uh,
it's in
we'll
it's
talk in a minute.
one of those
Um,
off the recording type of things. Okay, gotcha.
it's like still hoping one day she'll do an interview. Um, is there any correlation between some of all this interesting German research and the Hadron Collider, since it all
Oh,
happens at these strange places in Austria?
look, you know that I wrote The Third Way, and I devoted a
Hmm.
whole chapter to the Hadron Collider.
Hmm.
Um, I to this day, and I've been interviewed by a particle physicist who used to work at that collider, and she did her PhD in particle physics at the University of Oxford. And when I told her I didn't think any of it had anything to do with particle physics, and I told her why, she was just she was literally speechless during the interview. Take that for what it's worth. But I have to this day maintained that, yeah, there's particle physics going on there, but it's not just about that. It's about higher dimensional physics, which, by the way, they finally came out and admitted that's what they're looking for. And it's about torsion physics. And the reason why, if you haven't heard my explanation, is that the proton synchrotron, there are actually two circular colliders in the Hadron Collider. In fact, the Hadron Collider is a collection of 5 particle accelerators. Okay.
Yes.
You have 3 that kind of get everything going. The 4th one is the proton synchrotron. It's a small circular accelerator that physically, if you were to look at the vertical height profile of the Hadron Collider, the proton synchrotron is a small circular collider that is above the circular track of the Hadron Collider itself. Okay. Hadrons are nothing but heavy particles, so that people know. If you look at a top-down schematic of the 2 circular colliders, you've got the big track of the Hadron circular track, and then the proton synchrotron would lie on the track, canted off the axis of rotation of both accelerators. Follow me?
Yep.
So what that does, in my mind, is you're setting up a precessional, please pay attention, a precessional wobble in the proton plasma between the proton synchrotron and the Hadron Collider. In other words, you're setting up torsion.
Yeah.
Now, precessional wobble, why is that important? It's important because of Dr. Ronald Richter in Argentina, who told everybody that what he was doing was that he was rotating his plasma. It's all in the Nazi International. And he was using, here it comes, folks, the Lamore precession. There's your precessional wobble frequency to pulse that plasma, to stress it. So in other words, if you look at it with these weird Farrellian off the end of the twig speculative eyes, the Hadron Collider is a gigantic version of what Richter was doing in the 1950s in Argentina. And you'll recall, again, got to pat myself on the back here, because when they started up the Hadron Collider, I told George Ann Hughes, this is about nothing to do with particle physics. It's about hyperdimensional physics, and it's about torsion. And something is going to happen when they fire that thing up. Voila, guess what happened when they fired it up? They had to shut it down right away. Why? Because we were told that some of the coolant in the magnets around, they've got these gigantic, extremely powerful magnets on the Hadron Collider. They have to. Some of the coolant busted, and the magnetic, the magnets were going to melt and collapse, and we're going to have a problem here. So they they turned it on and they turned it off right away. Bang. Well, you can go online and look at pictures of the track of the collider and the magnets. You can look at pictures of what happened. There's this enormous buckling. It's like an earthquake occurred, and there's almost a dramatic fault line at one of the places where the collider track couples. So in other words, they produced a stress in the track of the collider. That's the key here. And folks, I don't care what they're going to tell you. I'm adamant on this. I'm using my 8th grade cobbled together off the back of the envelope junior high school physics, but I'm adamant here. The magnetic field, the coolant may have been heating up, but if it was heating up, it was because what was really happening is an underlying torsion effect, and that's what produced that severe disruption in the track.
Yeah,
It was a torsion effect, and when we've said that, we've said gravity
yeah.
and anti-gravity.
And
So they
instead,
had to shut that thing down right away.
yeah, because that would seem so. It would be hard to control something like that
Yeah,
with a with a wobble and torsion.
yeah. I've said all sorts of things about the Hadron Collider, but I'm convinced that there's a social engineering part of all of this. There is a hyperdimensional aspect to it. I am also convinced that because of the sheer scale, I mean, we're dealing with magnetic fields that are at least an order of magnitude stronger than the local magnetic field of the planet.
That doesn't sound like a good idea.
No, you're going to get resonance. No, of course not. You're going to get resonance effects in the planet. And in my thinking, you're probably going to get resonance effects in the sun because of the magnetic coupling of this planet to the sun. So yeah, this is not about mere particle physics at all. Never has been.
I
And
always,
even the particle physics that it is about is scary enough.
yeah, because it always struck me as sinister, and for some reason, there's always some foreboding whenever I looked at that thing.
Well, part of the sinister aspect, I'm convinced, is coming from something else that people overlook. Why is a particle accelerator a sovereign entity?
It is.
Yes, it's sovereign like the Republic of France, like Italy.
You can't even do that with a business.
Well, you can do it with banks if you're the Bank of International Settlements.
Well, I guess you can do it if you're Bill Gates. You need to get immunity, but that's not
Yeah,
quite
that
the same
too.
thing.
You can have immunity for your foundation, so why not a particle accelerator? But if
Because
it's a sovereign entity, that means that it has total control over all of its data. So it's no wonder the Chinese have wanted to build their own version. It's no wonder the Russians want to build their own versions, even though they're members of that accelerator. Something's going on, in other words. They want to check the science.
and they probably should because
Yeah,
that's troubling.
should be. Yeah, yeah. It is troubling. It should be troubling.
I
And
wanted
what's
to ask
what's
you.
the country that happens to have the biggest interest in the Large Hadron Collider? Could it be a certain troublesome little country in the center of Europe whose capital is Berlin? Berlin, die ewige Stadt.
No,
Berlin,
no, the
Berlin, die
Germans are
meine
dead
Liebe
now.
hat.
Are you saying the Germans are up to bad things? No, no.
No, I'm not saying the Germans are up to
Last
bad
time it
things,
was a
but
mistake.
it is interesting to me that this whole thing that the biggest member of the Hadron Collider is Germany. And it's interesting to me that they fire the whole thing up when the chancellor of the country just happens to have a PhD in, guess what? Quantum chemistry. Golly, Angela.
Speaking of someone responsible for social engineering,
Yeah, no kidding. Just, And by the way, there are questions about, did she really get that PhD in quantum chemistry legitimately? That's another story for another day. But yeah, it's the whole thing is just very weird, if you
yeah.
ask me.
I mean, weird things in
Germany.
Germany.
And by the way, let's not forget that Germany has the biggest interest in Europe's version of HARP. So
Oh dear. Oh, I did not know that.
yes, they do.
I thought that was our thing.
No.
Damn it. So once again, in our top secret super special projects that'll destroy and create weather, the Germans are involved, just like with NASA.
Look.
Can't we do anything without the Germans?
Yeah, there's a reason we haven't been back to the moon, folks. We don't have any more German rocket scientists around to help. Well, we've got Elon Musk, but hey, he's German too. But anyway,
So we can't do anything. Okay, well, good.
So we can't do anything. without the
Uh,
German rocket scientists
great.
or the
Good to.
Japanese automobile engineers, or whatever. But
So we're back to where we always were.
we're back to where we started here, folks. No, it's just very, very weird. But ISCAT. Let's put it this way: I've always been very suspicious about those devastating earthquakes that hit Georgia in the Soviet Union
Mm-hmm.
prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and when, oh, by the way, the Soviet foreign minister just happens to be from Georgia. You know? When Kohl is chancellor, what a lovely man he was. But anyway.
My name is Tino Struckmann. I run Lost Battlefields. Every year, I travel around the world to try to bring you to all the most interesting historical military locations from modern wars and the World War II special projects, battlefields, forts, fortresses, and tunnels, everything else. Things you may not be able to see or go to yourselves. Please join me on Patreon or join Lost Battlefields through the website so you get access to all my files and my notes. It really does help, and like, follow, share here on the channel if you can. That helps too.